Welcome to Real Talk Live, a First United Methodist Church Pearland podcast event out here at Steamboat Bills in Pearland. I'm so glad that you're joining us, and for our audience, give it up. Big rounds. We're so happy to be here to really close out our third season. This has been a phenomenal run. I am really just honored and excited that we've had this opportunity to have so many real conversations about faith, doubt, and everything in between. And today in this Real Talk Big Questions, you are invited to participate. And so you can text in your questions. We'd love to include them in our podcast panel today. As we are wrapping up this end of the third season, I just want to give a couple of big shout outs. I want to thank you to Raul and Pearland Podcast Studios. He's been phenomenal with us since the beginning. Set us all up and just takes phenomenal care of us. Obviously, thank you to all the guests this season. We really focused on the folks from our church and our partners, and it's been a really wonderful season. We've had some of the best views and traction that we've ever had. If you are not aware, FUMC Pearland Podcast Real Talk is number 127th in Christian podcasts worldwide, which there's a gazillion podcasts, so I think that's really cool that we're ranked. I don't really know what rank that is, but I'll take it, and I'm excited about it. So let's get into hearing from our panel. I want you guys to introduce yourself. Let us know who you are and why you agreed to be on a panel about big questions about faith. So,
the bird.
My name is Jessie Hayes, and I said yes to being on the podcast because I do have a lot of big questions, and as a teacher, I welcome big questions, and I like to answer them and ponder them myself. So,
Awesome. I'm Andrew Michael Cannon. I agreed to be here for very similar reasons. I also teach, so big questions are cool and fun. And they're my favorite questions, especially when it comes to my faith. I annoy my mother with having big questions that she doesn't have the answer to. She's nodding. She's here.
I'm Reverend J.T. LaRue, and I am here because my good friend Thea asked me to come. But I have, even as a pastor, you struggle with really big questions too, and especially when you're expected to know all the answers. And I'm not a teacher in a normal sense, how maybe you guys teach, but as a pastor, you get to teach, and it is good to be able, and it's and sometimes it's uncomfortable to answer big questions and just say, I don't know. And so I welcome those, and comfortable with the I don't know, I guess. So yeah.
awesome. Well, thank you all again for being willing to be on this live panel and to just share your questions and try to offer some answers. We do not promise to answer all of your questions today, but we are willing to dive into them. And so that's kind of the whole point behind Real Talk. It's a place where we talk about faith, doubt, and everything in between with real people. And so I'm once again really glad that you're here to be a part of that today. I want to dive in and just first ask what might happen if we ask questions about our faith, and what might happen if we don't.
Ooh.
I'll let you start.
Oh, y'all want me to start?
I sure do.
Okay. Oh. So ask the question one more time again.
What might happen if we ask questions about our faith, and what might happen if we don't?
Oh. I think the answer is the same. The answer is we come to the juxtaposition of it's either going to stifle us and stifle our faith and our growth and our flourishing, or it's not. And a budding happens, and you move past things that maybe come in conflict. You know, you might have been told something, you know, by someone that you trusted, and then you come into conflict with, well, that doesn't seem right, as I dig into this, as I research into this, as I read into it. And you either will clam up and stay in the shadow and or you'll bud into a beautiful flower, I guess, if you could say it that way, in the sense of knowledge and growing. So that's my thoughts, I guess. What do y'all think?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Where I know plenty of people that, you know, they grew up Christian, they were raised Christian, they asked big questions, and they didn't like the answers that faith gave them, and they've continued to, they've left the faith. And I think that's a possibility. I think we ultimately have to be comfortable with that possibility. I don't think you can be faithful if you don't ask those big questions, where you have some answers for things. Think about it. I think that makes your faith stronger ultimately. I think and cars are loud and fun. I ask those big questions, and they strengthen my faith when I do ask those big questions, and I like the answers I find. So
I agree. I think by asking the questions, for those of us that were raised in the church and, you know, may have been, like for myself, I was raised in the church, but not raised by super religious parents. And so conversations weren't had at home about it. And so I did have a lot of big questions as I got older and kind of came into my own. And when I got married is when, honestly, I found more answers. And for me, it allowed me to grow, and it allowed me to make decisions that I feel like helped me become a better person in general. But in that same token, like Andrew said, sometimes we ask those questions and we don't like the answers, and we have to make a hard decision on whether or not where we sit on it, and what does that do for us in our trajectory as a Christian, or our trajectory as a mom, or as, you know, whatever it may be. And I know I've come across that myself, moving from just being me to being a wife and then being a mom, and asking those questions and, you know, going through those phases.
Yeah. Two things kind of came to mind when I was listening to your responses, which is, the first is I was teaching a Bible study once, and was teaching how to exegesis, so how to really look at the text and figure out what's really going on. And one of the things you do in my process is you ask questions. You say, I wonder if, and how did this happen? And you start to, you know, ask questions. And someone raised their hand and said, are you asking questions of the text, or are you asking questions about the text? And in all honesty, I thought, what is the difference between that question? But I realized that this person felt very conflicted and afraid and nervous that we would dare ask questions of the text, that we would dare look at this holy text and say, what if, and I wonder, and how could this be even? And so I tried to answer as, you know, diplomatically as possible, not to completely crush their faith in that short time that I didn't really have time to help them reconstruct. But I think that's the danger, right? If you've believed one thing your entire life, and someone else asks a question or even tells you it's okay, you might unravel that. And some of us aren't ready for that. We're unwilling. We may not have enough time left in our life to actually do that work. And so I also often, you know, hey, just maybe that's not a question you need to ask at this point in your life. But I also, again, think of the reverse of how many people have been raised or around people who have not allowed questions, or when questions about their faith came up, they were told, put it on a shelf, and they'll tell you later the shelf broke. It was full of too many questions that were not answered. There were too many big problems I couldn't find the solution to, and I was never taught or led or even told it's okay that you have these questions. And I think one of the wildest pieces is, isn't that faith? I mean, if faith was complete confidence, no questions, no wonder, no if or worry, then it wouldn't be faith, right? There has to be this room. And I don't know about you, but my God is big enough to hold that space of wonder and journey, and to look and to listen and to even dare us to learn more. And so that's for me where I felt like those questions are really necessary, and especially if you're willing to do the work and you have the support around you to help. Come on in. You're welcome to join us. We're glad you're here. Yeah, come on. It's an open public event. We're out here at Steamboat Bills doing a podcast live event. We're so welcoming to our guests. All right, next question. What questions do you have right now, and how are you searching for the answers?
So,
Now let's get into it.
y'all go first.
I really tried to think about this question before I got here. Try to think about the question of my questions.
There's, I think I give so many answers. Which right now, Thea knows this. I'm writing a sermon that I have to do in like 2 weeks now, something like that. I'm reading the book of Jonah, and I had wanted to, and I knew I wanted to do this before she brought up what she wanted the series to be, and so we just kind of serendipitied into like both of us are like, hey, we should do Jonah, and so what I wanted was we don't tend to talk about the Old Testament very much. Where we talk about the gospel. Gospel is really easy to talk about. It's really easy to talk about Paul. We are culturally really divorced from the Old Testament, and Jonah is in that. And that's my current struggle is some cultural elements that are not present in later books of the Bible, and what that means in the greater context of our faith. Because there are parts of old Hebrew Jewish culture that we just don't observe anymore, or that we've just kind of moved past. And what do we say about those things looking back on those things? They're in the book, and we still have to read them and acknowledge that they're in there. And I think those are some of those big questions of the cultural elements of the biblical text, of what do we do with all of those, because not all of them fit into our modern Western society in the year of our Lord 2025.
Yeah. I think it's really huge to think about what does our past tell us about today, right? I mean, I think this is something that we have to continue to wrestle with. Whether we agree or like it or not, it's there. And how does it affect us today? I mean, it's huge.
I honestly never thought about it that way. But when you look at it historically, from a history government standpoint, we do take things that have happened in the past, and it's still taught, or it should be taught, to everybody. And we take that information and we learn from it and we move forward. And I know that my husband and I have had multiple conversations. There are many things in the Old Testament that I don't like the wording, I don't agree with, or I don't understand why it says it that way, and I'm hell-bent on never reading it, and I don't want it around, and I listen for it, those things. But how do we use that information in the context of where we are now, and not even a translation of it, but just what does it mean today? Beyond that, I have lots of questions about death and my thoughts on afterlife and things like that. And maybe that's because I've gone through a lot of death in the last year in my family. And so those are big questions, but not many of us on earth can necessarily give that answer without faith behind it. And so I'm really trying to work with that on myself.
Yeah. When I talk to young people and try to field them for questions, that's the number one question, right? What happens when we die? What happens when we die? What happens? Everybody wants to know. And that's one of those things that no one who's been there can tell us what it's like. I mean, I guess except Jesus, and came back to say it's all going to be okay, right? But yeah, continues to be a big, big question that for many feels still unanswered. What about you, JT? What big questions you got?
Oh, I really like Joel's. And I like what you were saying about the Old Testament and the tie-in there, and the exegesis is that aspect of looking on those things and looking at the past and asking the question and being willing to say, you know what, some are stories. The Old Testament is stories, and there's meaning behind them, and what's that meaning for us versus what does it mean for people during Christ's time as they were knowing those stories, right? For me, it's I'm in seminary at Perkins right now, so I just finished up classes, and I learned a word this semester called iatrogenesis, where is this idea of where you try to do good and your intention is good. There's not an inkling of ill intent, and in the end, you do more harm than good. And so that leads into the question, which is, as a church, not just the United Methodist Church, but as the church, where have we done this well-intentioned good, and then in the end done more harm than what we intended to do? And that's a hard question. So,
Well, bravo for asking them, right? For letting yourself dive in and look deeper and at least open yourself up to God. I think that's one of the best things that can happen when we're willing to ask those big, bold questions is we're trusting. We're trusting that there is an answer. We're trusting that we can ask and that God has got some sort of solution that we can't, figure out always just for ourselves. I think my questions are also right now really about the church as a whole, and it's probably our vocation, right? Just how much are we living into Christ's big plan for us? What will the future of the church hold? How will we get there? Who will lead the way? And those kinds of really trying to try to really discern God's will. How do we live it out today, right here in the real world, 2025, in America, and everything that we're facing? Just like, how does that really live out? I think those are some of my big questions right now too. And just have to keep praying, right? Just have to keep seeking, searching, asking out loud, being willing to even admit that I don't know and I'm searching for those answers. I want to move into some of our questions that came through this season from our podcast. Again, we had just one of the most excellent seasons that we've had thus far. It was just really awesome to hear the stories of our people, but then also to hear the feedback. And actually our top performing episode this season, and actually of all of Real Talk and any podcast I've ever been a part of, was our podcast titled God and AI, where we just tried to dive into that big topic of, are these two connected? What are the places where they don't make any sense? And what is God's plan through AI too? And so one of the questions I think would be important for us to kind of just wrestle with is, how do we as faith believers or wrestlers, how do we protect ourselves from the negative impacts of AI? And, this is, I think, can be broad on our environment, on our society, but even on our spirituality.
So I use AI daily at work for a lot of things. And, we're teaching students how to use it. But to me, it's very much, it's only as good as the information you give it, in the sense of what are you trying to, I think it's important to remember it's not necessarily where I would teach my children, my own personal children, where to seek answers that they should or could maybe form their own opinion around after learning about it. But it does a really good job of putting things into order and kind of structuring them to where sometimes your brain may not be able to. And I kind of think of that from watching people with that are neurodivergent in different ways, explain to me the book of Jonah and why it's structured like this. And, if you give it the parameters, it will lay it out for you. And I mean, with anything, especially with media and the way it is now, we do want to fact check most things that we're reading. And don't get me wrong, AI can be very detrimental to everybody because, you always hear oh, well, if it's on the internet, it must be true. And that now it's a perfect example of, no, we've got to wrestle with that. And you've got to kind of take that information and you've got to do your own research and you can't take the internet for Bible and, in the words of the Kardashians, and, you just kind of, you got to wrestle with that.
Yeah, when I was a kid, we had Google at our fingertips, and so we could Google everything, and that was our version of AI. Was this actual people's intelligence all compiled onto a big search page? For us, our demon wasn't ChatGPT; it was Wikipedia, because people could go in and change everything. And Wikipedia was blocked on all of our school computers because kids would just go there and be like, "Wikipedia said it is correct." And as an adult, what we've learned about Wikipedia is that Wikipedia usually cites its sources, and you can just trace it back. That's true for most of the things that you see. That's why we have MLA citation and APA, is because the sources are important. So you can go back to those sources and read those. And Google AI does the same thing. It will tell you where it's getting its information from. And so you can still vet your sources in a very similar way. That's very useful for Google. I don't use ChatGPT, so we don't know what they do. But the general thing I found with AI, and this is true for most things, I'm an artist, so AI art is one of those things we talk about a lot, is what we do with that. And a lot of people will just throw prompts into ChatGPT and end up with pictures and say, I have done it, I have created art. And a bunch of people that spend hours honing their craft will be like, well, no. And I find what is good about AI for if it's art, if it's you looking for information, if it's whatever, is that it is a really good jumping off point for you. If you are trying to find, if you're trying to get the gist of an idea, you can use an AI to get that structure for you. You can use Google AI for trying to figure out the structure of Jonah and then compare that with some other things and be like, okay, I have some terms I didn't have that it pulled from somewhere that I can use to refine that search into things that are not AI and the people that I know. And I can ask my pastor things that AI made me ask and whatnot. So AI as a jumping off point can be very useful. Just don't use it as a crutch.
Yeah. Oh boy, let me tell you. My wife has an opinion of AI. That's not good. Because I dove into it a little too heavy and spent several weeks lost in my office, delving deep into using Gemini to the point that my wife thinks that she's my digital girlfriend now. So, there's dangers there, right? I did the same thing when Wikipedia came out. I sat on Wikipedia and went from link to link to link to link to link to link. And so, as I was listening to you guys talk about, I've always thought of it just as a tool, right? But I remembered in school when teachers would tell you, you need to know how to do this because you won't have a calculator, right? And now we have a calculator on our phone. Like, it's with us all the time. Actually, you can ask Siri, sorry if I set anybody's phones off, and Siri will do the math for you. And it doesn't matter what it is. If you want to know the derivative of some function of how fast the helicopter props were going as they went over us, or if you just want to know how much tip you're supposed to give, right? And so I see AI becoming like the calculator, and they're like, well, back in my day I used the abacus, or whatever, and then in 20 years from now we're gonna be that we'll be that group that said, back in my day, yeah, and I had Google and that was all we had, I walked uphill both ways, but it's a tool, and no different than the tool of learning engineering, you have to know about engineering, and you can be a mile wide and an inch deep, and I can talk a little bit about it, but when you start digging into the exegesis of scripture in that sense of asking AI questions, now there are safeguards right now, and my fear is one day those safeguards will be lifted, but sometimes I'm also frustrated by the safeguards, because don't go to Google Gemini and use Gemini, or I think ChatGPT doesn't really have these, and DeepSeek doesn't care, and Gronk or whatever that other one is doesn't care either. But don't type the T word in, for example. It will shut down because it's controversial. Like anything that's controversial, there's those markers. Well, eventually they will lift those, and then what, right? But there's different versions of it. Like you said, there's the graphical version. There's ones that make videos. There's a large language model. When we talk about AI, we overgeneralize. But it's everywhere. It's in every single person. If you have a digital phone, it's in your phone already. how Siri thinks and functions, and how Android works, and if you have a Google Pixel phone, whatever, they're there now. They're in your cars. It's everywhere, and it's doing really good stuff. It's good. It can do good. Just like nuclear power can do good and power our homes for centuries, but we can also do great harm. And we have, in this age right now, with the infancy of AI and the level at which we're at, theologians and people that have ethics, that are willing to use the product, we have a ethical responsibility to do so well, because what AI learns on YouTube is horrible. What AI learns on the web is horrible. How we conduct each social interactions through Facebook and X and, well, what used to be Twitter, or any of those social media, the world is changing. And what we said about when Facebook came out, or those of us back in the day of MySpace, oh my gosh,
Hey, that was
it's
a great
changing.
time.
Right, exactly.
That was a great
Right, exactly, right. But as this evolves, this is that next step. It is evolving, just like the world around us evolves. You can either reject it and say evolution is not real, right? That's a question that people get asked from a religious standpoint. But the digital evolution is occurring at light speed. And you can either roll along with it, or you can reject it and hide in the shadows, for the Terminator to come. But yeah, it's deep.
I think one of the biggest things to hold on to as you talk about AI, I 100% agree, it's a tool, right? It's a piece of our society, it's a piece of our world now. It's here, it's actually been here longer than even this conversation. It's just that reminder that it just can't become your God. It just can't become the center of your worship. It just can't become what you put all your time, energy, effort into, right? It can't be the only place you go to ask questions. It can't be the only place you search. You don't let it replace conversation. You don't let it replace history books. You don't let it replace the Bible. You don't let it replace this multitude of options we have. Let it be a tool in the tool chest, but don't let it become your God. And that's, we read about this often in the Old Testament, right? This is one of those benefits of the Old Testament, this warning against letting other things become your God, worshiping foreign gods, letting anything else move into the center of your life. It's probably why your wife was a little concerned about your 2-week dive, because it's like, hey, it's just a tool, right? And so I think those are the things I would say is the best way to safeguard ourselves from whatever AI holds, is that we don't let it become our God. We hold on to what we know is true, and those multitudes. Before I ask this next question, just want to remind you, you have a QR code that you can ask questions. I have that link on my phone, and so you can text those in, and we'll get to those in just a second. So I just want to make sure that you know how to text in your questions. All right, here's a fun one. How much should religion impact government and public policies? This is kind of in reference to Old Town Pearland revitalization happening right in front of the church, and talking with the city about those plans and then how the church might get involved. But how much do you feel like religion should impact government and public policies?
Oh.
Or what questions do you have around that?
That's a hard one.
It's called big questions.
I know, right? That is a really big question. Because you have local policy, like what you're talking about, that's happening right outside of Pearland, First Street Pearland. And then that stretches, that the boundaries are limit. It can be the whole world in the way that we engage. I'm going to take the easy out on this one. We have the moral and ethical responsibility to be involved morally and ethically. That's really over generalizing it, though. I think, though, this doesn't really answer the question. I think we get involved, though, and we will put personal interest over what is best for others. So I think we have the responsibility to answer the actual question, how do we choose to love, right? And so if we're choosing to love because it suits us best or suits my business, my personal business best, then am I loving, right? Am I loving my neighbor? And sometimes, that means that I may not like what the group may want to do, but they might see something different than I see. And how am I choosing to love? And so what we learn, through scriptures is where Jesus says, love your enemy and pray for those that persecute you. So even if someone's doing something that you don't want them to do, or you're upset that they're tearing down this legacy or this thing in the community and they're putting this other thing up, so you have to ask that hard question then of, is this better for them, or am I taking the stance that I'm taking because it's better for me? And I think that can come into there's flies. Love all of God's creatures, right? Anyways, but yeah, it's a hard question. Yeah, it's a very good, deep question. I hope y'all answer that better than me.
My husband's looking at me because he knows this is a really loaded question for me. The way I always look at things is the way other people, decisions that they make or choices that they make, whether it be for our city or for just our area, whatever the case may be. We live in an area that it's not just the Christian idea of what things should look like. And so when I look at, I'll use school, for example, it's not that we don't recognize Christmas, but we have families that are not Christian. And, we recognize the fact that we need to encompass everybody. And so when I think about decisions I make, because I am an administrator on campus, so I do have to make those decisions. So thinking I'm not in government and don't ever want to be in government, but if it's not harming the population in a sense of we are still loving our neighbors, we are allowing everybody to have a space to believe where they are and meet them where they are, then it shouldn't come into play. I don't personally believe that one religion or church or person should be able to make all decisions for everybody. It should be a collective conversation where it celebrates all people and it recognizes all people and it gives them the space to have their beliefs and their spirituality and their lives in a safe environment. I don't really know if I answered your question, but I think that's as well as I can put it right now.
Good job. You're all being very very kind. That's great. That's great. We're called to be kind, so you're doing great. What do you got, Andrew?
So when the conversation of religious and politics comes up, there's an argument that I invented when I was in college, which is based on this very old Greek definition of politics, where it comes from the Greek group. It's polis or poli, which is just a society. And basically, anytime you get a group together, any kind of group of people, that will become political at some point. There is an inherent amount of politicking in any kind of group of people, especially the bigger it gets, because the more politicking and policy you have to apply to big groups of people. And so religions are groups of people, and we are Christians, and we pride ourselves on being a very big group of people. And so there is some amount of politics they're going to have. We're going to agree on some kind of cultural politics between each other, as we talk about culture a lot between each other, because we have a Christian culture and we have a Methodist culture and we have any other kinds of cultures. That's true for every religion. Even our non-Christians have some kind of culture upholding. Even atheists have some kind of culture they're upholding. America is a lovely place because we try to make room for all of those cultures in there. And so I think our duty to ourselves is to make sure we have room for ourselves. And I want to believe in doing that there is we're doing that way that leaves space for anyone to do that with their beliefs too. I think that's the best way of discussing the policy, is not, let's impose our own politics and we will have the only politics, but room for our politics within the wider scope that is American politics. I think you can do that with any group of people, because we are smaller groups of people. Our church is made of families inside that church who are going to have their own family politics between them, and helicopters are flying over me. We're making this quite, and I love it. But yeah, we're gonna have smaller groups with our bigger groups. We're gonna have our own Bible studies we talk to, and we're gonna have our own discussions within that. Our church leaves us room within that for us to have our own separate Bible studies and our own separate families. And sometimes you'll go spend a Saturday evening at a different church and see how they worship, because that's fun. And on the individual level, we have our own relationship with God. And so our church leaves room for that. I think our government should leave room the same way our church leaves room. I think that is maybe a Christian policy that we can put on our whole government.
Again, great job. I think you guys are being, I think you answered it really well. I think my thought would be, one of the things that I love most about God is that God is relational, that God is not distant, far off, removed, but decides to be in relationship with us. And I think that's actually our call as well, is to be in relationship. And the best way we make an impact on the societies that we live in and how we organize the chaos of that society is through relationships. And so that's authentic and real. Let people get to know who you really are. Share your view, be honest, be bold, but also do it when people can know your heart and they know more than just your stance on one policy, but instead know who you are as a whole person and have that deeper impact. And I think that's where it comes down to, as well as both like city government and even nationally, like be relational, be honest and vulnerable. And ideally you're sharing your relationship with God through that as well. And so then that impact just for me would come across a lot more authentic, and I would hope would be more closer to what God is wanting as for us as well.
Can I follow up
Yes.
on that? So I think my biggest struggle is, we don't have a voice that much outside of our community, our group of people that we interact with. And the majority of what people are hearing from the Christian standpoint doesn't embody the Christians that we are in our community. Is everybody that are making those decisions in office, nationally, locally, wherever it may be, it's hard for me because I don't necessarily agree with the way that they're living and the way that they are treating others and the way that they are building those relationships or not building those relationships. And so almost having to combat those stories and those conversations with people in my circle that like, well, no, you have to look at it, like, think about it this way. And what about this? And that's where I struggle. And I think that's my biggest reason of the way we act towards each other and leave space for people is more important than saying like, this is the Christian way to do it. And that is because that is America and that's what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think too often we don't even express where we are with the people closest to us. I mean, how many of us don't talk about politics with family, right? Why not? That's our family. I mean, those are the people that have to love us. They raised us. They've taken care of us. We're going to take care of them. You would think we'd be able to have a civil conversation about where we stand on some of the public policies that are happening. And yet we just continue to pull away versus maybe trusting that relationship, even if you do disagree.
I think this ties into the very first question. What are you willing to, what kind of questions are you willing to ask, knowing answers of people, which means that you're making a judgment call on people. And I hate that about, I dislike that about myself. Like, if you know people and how they're going to respond, like family, whatever, well, this is what you grew up with, and this is what you're supposed to think. This is the Bible. And you're like, hold up. And especially when you talk about like government, social policy, things like that. And being United Methodist is this very broad and big table. and we're expected as Methodists and as Methodist pastors to come to the table and welcome and be kind, right? But sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, like, you are not being kind, and I don't want you to be at my table, because I know this about you down the street at this thing that we were at, whatever, or I saw you on TV, or you said this on Twitter or X or Truth Social or wherever, and I'm like, oh, but there's a litmus test, really. Are you kind? Mm-hmm. Can you be kind? And then it's on the onus of that kindness is on us, and that's our responsibility. That's it. Can we be kind? Can we care for one another as we are instructed to do so? And knowing that other people out there aren't caring, right? And knowing that other people out there that aren't caring are supposed to be our brothers and sisters in Christ. Oh, yeah. But still, kindness is to overflow from us. And to love is the hardest thing in the world to do.
Good word.
That's my thoughts.
Good word. I'm going to just take a check. I'm not receiving any questions from y'all. Has anybody tried?
To the YouTube.
Both of those QR codes? Well, there's two. There's two. There should be two on your table. One's to the YouTube and one's to the questions. So if you keep going to YouTube, try the other one. Okay. We're going to ask one more question planned, and then nobody gives you a chance if you have a question to type in. All right.
With a good one.
Yeah. Where was it? All right, let's just, I think we've actually answered these already. How do we share our faith while holding that space for others? You all kind of mentioned that kindness and need to hold that space for others and wanting to have the space for us. So how do you share who you are, maybe even your questions, your wrestling, the things you're sure about, while holding that space for other people who maybe aren't ready or I told you straight out they don't agree?
So the way I like to think about it in a secular sense, which is the only way I think about it, but when I'm in that space, I like to think of Christianity as a philosophy as well as my faith. And there's a statement that I'm making about myself, about how I view the world, and I can communicate those things in a secular way. The way I think we treat each other is a Christian philosophy, but it's one that I can just say, like, the way we should treat each other, we should love each other, we should love your neighbor. That's a Christian idea, but I don't have to evoke Christianity to get that point across to other people, and I can get people to agree with that. And I have many friends who are not Christians. I have a very, very good friend from high school who is staunchly agnostic, and we still have very fruitful conversations about these things, and I still think they're ultimately a good person. And I think I can hold that space, and ultimately I think the rest comes with that. And mostly I believe in leading by example with my faith, and if I'm giving a good enough example, then hopefully enough people are asking the question of, well, look at Andrew, and look at how at peace they are with the world, and how do we be more like Andrew? Maybe we look into this Christianity thing. And so I think in holding that space still makes me a good Christian and still can bring people to the faith without being loud and proud about it.
He's very St. Francis. St. Francis of Assisi, the idea of preach the gospel and when needed, actually use words, kind of, yeah. So I love it. You go. It's your turn.
Ask the question one more time. I lost it.
How do we share our faith while holding space for others?
I will be very honest. I don't talk about it often. It used to make me very uncomfortable in public spaces to talk about religion outside of like the people that I knew believed in it and like had that comfort with them. And maybe that's the way I was raised. My mom was very much like, these are our beliefs and this is what we believe, but we don't need to push that on other people. And so that's just kind of, I surrounded myself with people that were like-minded for a while, and that's where I found comfort. But then I try to lead by I try to live my life in the way that not necessarily I would want to be treated, but I try to think from other people's standpoint and how would they want to be treated. And I hope that the way I live my life and the way I'm teaching my children and the way that I carry myself professionally or socially, that people see my religion or like my spirituality come through that. I do feel like I worship more. I feel closer when I'm with music. And so, for example, when people ride in my car, it's likely that that's what's on my phone. And if it's not Trolls with my kids, it's probably that. And, you know, I've noticed, at least what I hope, is that my 4-year-old, he goes and he talks to people and he'll say, that's because God made us and he loves us and he takes care of us. And my mother-in-law called me the other day to tell me that she was on the phone and he said, don't worry about it, Gia. God got it. And so I do feel like the way, even though I don't feel like I'm like, hey, I'm a Christian and I believe in this and I think you should do this. The way I'm living my life, I hope, and I feel like it's doing what I hope it is doing. But I'm also having a lot of faith in myself and my actions that other people are picking up on that.
I think that as I've listened to y'all, there's really, really good responses. In the sense of discipleship, this idea of I'm not a Christian, I am becoming Christ-like, or like Christ, like in this idea of I don't need the title, I don't want the label. It's the shifting then of that. It's the mindset of being, because it's being Christian in moments where you don't want to be like Christ, right? Where you know, your child saying that response to you or whatever, but like where you don't think about it because you just are who God's called you to be, which is this person that loves and cares and kindness, and you're doing these the fruits of the spirits are coming because your tree is growing, right? It's just something that happens versus you're not blessed with the title. You're not baptized and all of a sudden now you're a Christian, right? We make that assumption because we like to delineate and to separate, oh, this is my Christian life, this is my business life, my career, this is my home life with my family, and not really thinking about that at the core, because we do that with church too, right? I go to church. No, you don't go to church, you are the church. You don't become a Christian, you become more like Christ, and in so being who God has called you to be. And other people might call you a Christian, but it's not something that you're not given. It's not a ribbon to put on your chest to say, I am this thing, I am this title, right? And that, I went like 20 plus years, like not having that realization, and then it just like clicking in this mind shift to where then now the culture, I'm naturally falling into being this entity, this essence of this new creature, as the scripture says, right? I've become this new thing, and it's the becoming of it versus being labeled it, you know? And then it just ebbs and flows and seeps out of your pores that that's who you are without thinking about it, without acknowledging the limitation of saying, well, because when you say I am a Christian, then people just assume then, okay, well, you're like these other, there's these labels that you've put barriers on, these markers that say I exist in between these two things. Well, that's not true at all. It's a very fluid thing. I am becoming. In the John Wesleyan aspect and being a Methodist, this idea of we are going on to perfection, that God has made this place for us where we are perfect, but we are being made perfect. And so simultaneously, God existing in a moment and then outside of the moment itself, right? That's the mystery of the faith. And so I think of that way too, in the sense of how do you live that out? Well, it's in the very moment itself, but it's also 10 moments ago and it's 10 moments into the future of who you are. And you don't get it right, but then you also don't get it wrong. I mean, there's space there. So it's this wibbly wobbly thing. And I just think it's beautiful. So.
Yeah. I think if we want to hold space for other people's religious beliefs and want them to hold that space for ours as well, we have to hold space for other political beliefs
Sure.
and humor and I don't know, what kind of foods you like. We have to have that space there, right? And it's not to say that, you have to say it's okay or I agree with, or you don't have to, I know that can get to the slippery slope, but I think you have to be a person that holds that space for others if you want them to hold that space for you, right? And I do think about those early apostles who went and shared the gospel. How, yes, 500 were baptized in one day, but how many people walked away, right? We see this with Jesus's life too. Look how many did not turn, how many did not come to the faith, did not accept this new way of thinking about God. In fact, there's a whole religion that still exists today because Jesus didn't change it. He's started something new. And so just, I think, being willing to hold that space for people is one of the ways that I believe that they'll be willing to hold our space too. A question that's come in: what is the most important thing for us to do today as faithful followers of Christ to grow the impact, to reach and to continue to share this gospel? They said, is it to lessen our beliefs so people feel more comfortable, or is it to testify more strongly? And those are not the only options, but what is the most important thing we should do today to share our faith?
Oh. Y'all got an answer?
So I feel like I can relate this back to my job person, who I am at work. I'm what we call the complaint department. I'm where people come to unload on, and having those conversations, listening where I may not agree, but I have to listen from a standpoint of understanding. I'm still going to give my opinion. I'm still going to give them my thoughts. I'm still going to tell them what I think would be the better choice, but I'm leaving them the opportunity to take it. And so I have a friend going through a divorce right now, and I have a friend who very spiritual in the sense, but does not like to attend church as in the structural building, right? And so the three of us, have lots of conversations often because while two of us grew up together into very different ideas of Christianity, she's deconstructing a lot of what she thought was, well, that's what I was told. That's what I was led to believe. And so I'm able to open more and have those conversations because I'm comfortable there to say, well, actually, that's not true. That's not what it says. That's not how it's intended. I'm not comfortable in the public sense of outside of like this. Like, you're not going to see me just like striking up a conversation with a friend at the bar. I mean, maybe, but depends. Yeah.
So the way I think about this is, if you have a belief that's worth having, is a belief worth testing, which is why we ask these big questions. I think if you have really taken a belief that's worth not only having but worth sharing, you have gone through the rigor and gone through that and can explain this belief in any way that's effective to more than just Christians. It's effective to your staunch atheists. It's effective for your Muslims and what have you, that you have found a way that it will hold true just on its own, just outside of faith. And I think that's not diminishing your own belief. I think that's strengthening your belief. And so the answer is, strengthen it, but strengthen it to a point where it exists outside of itself, and that will still hold space for people. And I think it helps you hold your own space as well. I think it makes it well earned.
Ask me the question again, because I want to make sure that my answer I'm about to give you aligns with the question.
What's the most important thing we should do today to grow our faith? The reach of our faith. Grow the church. Grow the faith.
So what I'm about to say does not mean everybody needs to go out and do this thing. However, in response to a sermon I heard a couple months ago, I went out and got a tattoo on my arm. And it's James 2:13b, the tattoo is. And it's in Greek here on my arm. And it's just a portion of that, which is mercy triumphs over judgment. And I think in the sense of the response to our faith and the witnessing and the voice and the loudness of talking over helicopters that keep circling us from the United States Army over there, because it's an Apache that keeps going by. But the mercy triumphs over judgment. Christ has answered he's asked the hard question in Luke, I think it is, or it's actually in a couple different gospels. What is the most important thing? Love God with your heart, your soul, your mind. Sum up all of the scriptures, all the prophecies, all the prophets, all that stuff, and it's that. That is it. Love God with everything that you are. And then the second is like it, but to love your neighbor as yourself, right? And if mercy's not at the beginning of that and the loudest thing in that, and what is grace in this space for the Holy Spirit, the Holy Spirit does not need me, even as a pastor. I'm going to say this, I might get in trouble, I don't know. But grace and the Holy Spirit does not need Reverend J.T. LaRue. It wants Reverend J.T. LaRue, but it does not need me to do its good work. You know, it does what it does on its own. Amen. And so I think to remember that God does what God does. He wants us to be a participant with it, absolutely. And so to answer that question is, let me participate. Let me do more. Let me be a part of that mercy. Let me be a part of grace. Let me be a part of that agape. Let me show love, not expecting anything in return, and to do it more and more until I have no more breath. So that's my answer.
You have something?
I was going to say, we should lead with him.
Sorry, I'll get to sermonating up here, so yeah, I gotta be careful.
Well, I think that's definitely going to be my answer too. And actually, I thought you were going to talk about your T-shirt.
Oh, that's a good one too.
That would be my answer, is we stop trying to build the church that we know today, and we start living in the kingdom of God. We start living in the rule of Jesus Christ, which is love, which is kindness, mercy, justice, compassion, patience, self-control, those fruits of the Spirit that are promised and delivered. And so to really live that way and to put those needs of others above our own, above our castles, above our places that we love and the things that we like them to be, and the pieces of our religiosity that we have made our idols, is to push past that and say, we're here to love, right? That final night in the chapter in John's gospel, as Jesus washes the feet of his friends and followers, he tells them, love one another as I have loved you. That is how we continue. If we were people known by our love, then these religious people who stand up with a different narrative, no one would even worry about them. No one would ever lump them into the same group as us, because we would be so evident with our love, with our care. If we were loving, there would be no need for any other social programs. The churches, the body of Christ would take care of the people in need. We would feed the hungry, we'd clothe the naked, we would take care of the orphans and the widows. And I think that
visit those in prison.
Yeah, visit those in prison, care for the people around us, and honestly offer people new life. I believe that that's what would happen, and people would see that and want to know more. That's how I believe the gospel spread the first time, and how I believe that it will continue to do. And I know that it will happen. I know that God's will is so good, and lives are changed by that goodness and compassion. And so I have faith that will continue. All right, to wrap it up, just what's one thing you can do this week to create space for big questions in your life with your family, your children, your coworkers? your neighbors? What's one thing, one step?
Is that for them or us? Oh. That should be for them, though.
Well, y'all, they're going to give
I-
you some ideas.
I
You
would
think
s-
about it too.
I would say never to not step away from hard conversations just because it's a hard conversation, but to do it in love, though, and to be intentional that it's in love and in love with the person, even the person that you don't like. So not turn away and walk away, because it's easier to go down the hall, right, and go the other way to ignore it, but to not be afraid. I think that's my thoughts.
My really easy answer is go read the Bible again. It's
Yeah.
very easy. One of those things is, pick a story and try and find something new in it. There's always room to find something new, especially if you haven't read it in a while. Going back to read something, you will always find something new.
To go with yours, I read a different translation than you normally read.
I was gonna say, read new
yeah,
translation.
yeah.
A lot of people read NIV. People just know the King James version because they know English. It's the King James version of the Bible and Shakespeare are the two most prevalent English works in English lexicon. I have been reading the New Revised Standard Version, which I really enjoy. It's a very, very good translation. And that makes everything sound new and fun. And I have the Bible app, so I can switch translations on the fly. And so if I come to a verse where I say, I wonder how that's worded in a different translation, I'll open a different translation. I'll open NIV, I will open King James. I'll open the Message for a fun time. If you haven't read the Message, it is not written in verse anymore. It's written in the plainest English you can, which makes it very easy to read and very interesting. So I love that when I read the Bible. So pick a book. I read Ecclesiastes a couple of weeks ago, and that was a lot of fun. So.
What?
Yeah.
That was going to be my answer. I had great intentions when this new year started, that was going to be what I did. And I have accomplished a lot of things, but reading the Bible is not one of them. But I like the idea of looking at it from different translations, because that's where I get caught up. Yeah. I stop.
I think mine would just be let yourself wonder. Let yourself ask a big question. Let yourself be afraid. Let yourself be nervous. Let yourself get mad. I believe God can handle it. And if you're asking questions, you're talking, you're dissecting, you're diving deeper, you want to learn more. So thank you to our panelists. Can you give them a round of applause? They're amazing. I really, really appreciate you guys coming out and being a part. Thank you for participating. I'm going to invite our musicians up to kind of we'll close us out with a couple of tunes. I just want to thank you again for supporting Real Talk. It's been such an amazing ride. You can check us out on YouTube at any place you find podcasts to hear past episodes. We'd love it if you like, subscribe, share, follow. All those things matter. And definitely send this episode to a friend that needs to know it's okay to ask big questions too. Thanks again for joining us. Hope you hang out.
Real Talk Podcast is produced by First United Methodist Church Pearland in collaboration with Pearland Podcast Studios, recorded here in Pearland, Texas. We invite you to check out our website at fumcpearland.org to check out additional events and opportunities for you to engage in real talk about faith and relationships.